Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about my top nonfiction reads for 2022. So we're currently at the first part of January 2023 and I wanted to look back and review 2022 and some of my top reads for the year. I've divided this video into two videos actually, so this is the nonfiction video and I'm going to be doing a fiction video later, and that is because I read a lot in 2022, even by my standards. So in 2022 I read 202 books total, and that's quite a bit. And most of them were good, I have to say. I really felt like last year was a good year. I discovered a lot of books that I enjoyed. A lot of them got really high ratings for me. I had a good reading year in 2022. But I wanted to highlight some of the top reads or the ones that stuck with me the most in that year, and just because of the volume, I'm going to split them into nonfiction and fiction. So this is the nonfiction. Once you watch this video, stick around and watch the fiction video. So top nonfiction reads of the year. Let's start with one that I read early on in the year, at least before February, because I remember it was in my last apartment, and that was Cured: The Life-Changing Science of Spontaneous Healing, and this is by Jeffrey Rediger. So this book was just about, as the title says, spontaneous healing. And spontaneous healing, the author goes to describe, is something that the medical community kind of doesn't like to talk about because most of the time it's some sort of remission that cannot be explained by science, and he thinks this is a blind spot in science because by not looking at these cases, we're kind of not looking at ways that we can help future patients by assuming this is just a fluke and that it has nothing to do with maybe something the patient did, or maybe it gives us a better idea or more information about the illness as a whole. By not looking at these cases of so-called spontaneous healing, we kind of have a blind spot in medicine, and it's something that doctors don't want to address. I feel like the author did a really good job talking about something that could be a little bit controversial. I don't actually remember if I did a review of this book on my channel because I remember thinking, ooh, this could be a little controversial. Like, people hear spontaneous healing and they might think something that's a little woo-woo, or they think unsubstantiated claims, but I feel like the author did a really good job talking through some of the reasons people might see a so-called spontaneous healing, from a misdiagnosis to a disease that we don't know a lot about, to admitting there are things that they don't know. And I feel like going out there and having to say, hey, there's things that we don't know, there's things that we don't understand yet, and that's just something we're gonna have to sit with and be comfortable with, is kind of going out there on a limb. So I feel like the author did a really good job of balancing his open-mindedness with his more scientific training and background, because I believe he was a doctor. So Cured: Life-Changing Science of Spontaneous Healing, I really enjoyed that book, and I've thought about it a lot through the years, so I feel like that in and of itself pushes it to like my top reads for nonfiction, just because of how much I've thought about it since reading the book. So it clearly had an impact on me. The second book that I wanted to talk about is The Subplot: What China is Reading and Why It Matters by Megan Walsh. So The Subplot, What China is Reading and Why It Matters is the subtitle, and this was a book that I pulled off the shelf thinking it was going to be a quick, fun read, but it actually wound up being a 5-star read. I had a great time reading it, and it was something I didn't know I was interested in. China, as far as I'm aware, is still the largest population country with the largest population in the world. I'm not sure where India sits. I know India is also a fast-growing country. Large population base, and that large population base is reading, and what are they reading? I feel like it's very different. Or at least when reading it, I felt like it was very different in some regards, but very similar in other regards from the United States, or what we might consider the Western world. And that in and of itself was very interesting. It was a very small book, so I felt like I could get through it in a reasonable amount of time, but the author really took time to explain things in a way to someone who isn't already an expert in the field in that short amount of time, and did a great job doing it. I learned quite a bit in the book. I learned a lot about the breakdowns of like genres within genres. I feel like that was a very interesting section. There's also a great section on, I forget probably the technical word for it, but webtoons, if I remember correctly. These online genres that come out in like weekly chapters. I actually have a lot of friends and some siblings who read those sort of things, obviously in English, not in Chinese. But it was a very interesting book, and it was more interesting than I expected it to be, which is always a pleasant surprise to get a book out of the library and love it more than you think you're going to, as opposed to the converse, which sometimes happens when you take a book out of the library and you like it less than you wanted to. So it's a little bit of a disappointment. So that one was really good. Again, The Subplot: What China is Reading and Why It Matters by Megan Walsh. Really enjoyed that book and would highly recommend it. The third one was more of an art book, and that is Vasily Kandinsky, Around the Circle. I really hope I'm saying his name right. So this was actually a book that accompanied an art show that was going around the nation, I believe. and it featured work from the artist Vasily Kandinsky. It was a beautiful book. I loved the art. I wish I could see it in person. I feel like it was over. I feel like I remember looking at this, or maybe it was still going on, but it was like in New York, and I do not live close to New York City. I think it was in New York City. I just remember looking into it and being like, wow, I wish I could see this in person. And it was just a really pretty book. I would highly recommend purchasing this book because it's the kind of book that you want to look back and read again or look at the pictures again. I feel like I spent a long time paging through it over the course of a day or maybe 2 days. I don't remember how long it took me to read it, but I remember the impact it left on me, and I remember seeing it back in the library on the shelf and thinking, oh, I want to get that out again so I can go through it again. So being a little bit of a hypocrite because I haven't purchased the book, even though I'm recommending you purchase the book, but that is because I move a lot and I hate moving books. So that's my only excuse. I'm just going to put it out there. I think you should buy the book, and I think I can buy the book when I get into a living situation where I'm going to stay for a long time and not just a year or two. So Vasily Kandinsky, Around the Circle, really, really recommend. And also if you have the opportunity to go visit whatever art show that book was accompanying, I also recommend that. So that's just that. The next one on my nonfiction list is Blood Runs Cold, The Yablonsky Murders and the Battle for the United Mine Workers of America, and this was by Mark A. Bradley. I listened to this book in an audiobook format, and this book discussed, it's like local history / true crime, and I'm usually not a big fan of true crime, but this book didn't get really graphic or really sensationalize the violence, which I feel like is really good and something I don't enjoy about some true crime books. There are some that are done very well, and I believe there's a role for it. I just tend to be very sensitive to things like that, so I was a little nervous going into this book, but it discusses the United Mine Workers of America, which is a union, and the leadership, which had kind of become corrupt, and some attempts to influence and change the leadership, which wound up resulting in the murder of the Yablonsky family. So this was a very interesting audiobook. I think the person who read the audiobook, which I should have looked him up before going on here, did a very, very good job. I enjoyed it. So if you have the opportunity to listen to the audiobook, I do recommend it, but the text, the print version is perfectly fine, I'm sure. It was a little bit of local history from the coal mining region of the United States, but I feel like it was very interesting. It was very engaging. It was this whole story that I wasn't familiar with before reading this book. So I'm glad this book introduced me to it. And I've thought about it a lot since I read the book, which I feel like is always a sign of the fact that the book had some sort of impact on me, and I just really recommend it. So if you're looking for something that's local history, maybe with a little bit of true crime, but something that really talks about, local history or history at a little more granular level than world leaders, I really do recommend this one, Blood Runs Cold by Mark A. Bradley. I think you're really going to enjoy it. The final one that I wanted to mention on my top nonfiction reads of 2022 is Forest Walking by Peter Wohlleben. So Forest Walking was written by a professional forester who actually lives in Germany. I believe the book was actually a translation, and he talks about his experience walking through the woods. And I enjoy hiking, I enjoy being out in nature, I enjoy trying new trails in the city or in nature, and I feel like one thing that stuck out to me about this book was the author's enthusiasm for the woods and the enthusiasm for getting out in nature. He gives a lot of little suggestions or little hints or ways to enjoy walking in the forest, little things to look for, and I actually took some hikes while reading this book. Like in the course of reading it, I was reading a little bit of it, and it was kind of nice because it was in the fall, so I went out to the woods and hiked, and really reading this book changed the way that I went on these hikes. It made me really slow down and look at things at a much closer level, and I feel like it just kind of opened my eyes to slowing down, taking my hike a little slower, and kind of getting involved in the natural world. What's over there? What's over here? What can I glean from this information that I see here? It was just a really interesting book, and I feel like what kind of put it over the top was the author's enthusiasm. I like it when I can tell the author is really passionate about a subject. That kind of pushes it to a new level, even if it's something that I don't have a lot of passion for. When the author's passionate, I feel like it comes through in the writing, and it's something that's really hard to fake. So when you really sense it in an author, especially in a nonfiction author, I feel like it really comes through. So those are my top reads for 2022 in the nonfiction category. Cured, The Life-Changing Science of Spontaneous Healing by Jeffrey Rediger. The subplot, What China is Reading and Why It Matters by Megan Walsh. Vasily Kandinsky, Around the Circle. Blood Runs Cold, The Yablonsky Murders and the Battle for the United Mine Workers of America by Mark A. Bradley. And Forest Walking by Peter Wohlleben. Those are not by any means the the only nonfiction books I read this year. There was a ton that I read. Check out my channel for all my interesting reviews about other books that I read this year. If you have any interesting nonfiction books to recommend, please let me know. And I also want to know what the best nonfiction books you read in 2022 was. I love to hear it. I love to hear other people's suggestions. I always try to work them in, so please let me know. I love to hear it. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.